Need to get to some college football news. We knew the name Troy Dannen around here because he was the AD at UW that didn't get Kalen DeBoer re-signed. And
he was the UW AD for a couple of months.
Like 6 months, like 8 months, something like that.
And then he was gone.
He had been, I can't remember what school he was at first, but he had been in the Midwest.
I thought he was at Troy, wasn't he?
Maybe that's it. But there were reports that his family never moved out to Seattle.
Yeah.
And then he ended up taking the Nebraska athletic director job after leaving UW. So he spoke today, and Nebraska's in just an interesting spot, I think, because they're one of these teams that were a classic blue blood and don't have nearly as much to offer in the college football landscape today as they used to.
No.
And so he was speaking to their collective, the 1890 initiative. And this is what he said. He said, "Let me tell you something about NIL. It's not going to last forever. Here's what I think is going to happen, and I'm pretty sure I'm right. There will be an antitrust settlement this year in the courts. Part of the antitrust settlement, 1890, Nebraska's collective, is going to get banned. The collectives are going to go away. What's going to be replaced is athletic department revenue sharing with our athletes. In the budget of our athletic department right now, we have a $20 million placeholder in 2 years to share money with our athletes. It's in the budget right now. That goes back to the House committee settlement we've talked about. Mm-hmm. There's 3 schools in the country, I think, that have that in their budget right now. That's Georgia, Texas, and us. We've got great advantages here. We don't have debt. We have great reserves. We have a great fan base and facilities. We have great advantages to addressing what lies ahead. Let's talk about what happens next in the next 2 years. NIL's not coming in-house. It's not going to be replaced by something else. At Washington, our football program last year had an NIL budget of about $10 million and went to the national championship game. This is where he gets Oregon in there. He says Oregon's is 23, Ohio State's is 23, ours here is not even 10. Says we have the facilities, we have the coaches, we have the fans.
Strays.
In the next couple of years, we'll be fighting an even fight, but right now we are not fighting an even fight.
Let me just state for the record. First off, that's not the reason why you're not any good. Shut up. You haven't been relevant in football in 25 years, and it's not because of NIL. Okay? It's not. Yes. Whether Oregon has a $23 million NIL, I don't know. They have a bunch of cash. And so does, but to say that Oregon is the only one, stop it. Right? Miami has a huge one. Ohio State has a huge one. USC has an enormous one. Any school that's competing for 5-star kids has to have one.
Yep.
So I understand for Nebraska, you don't have one. By the way, NIL is not going away.
I don't think so.
Good luck with that. Good luck putting it.
It might look different. It might have different guardrails, but I don't think it's going anywhere.
They're saying NIL, it's not coming in-house. Really? Yeah, good luck with that.
Seems like it might.
Have fun in the courts on that one. Okay? NIL isn't going anywhere. You're going to pay athletes, but tell them that they can't. So his whole, this is such a bonehead thing. So I'm supposed to believe that, by the way, in the settlement, the House settlement, when all that goes down, yes, revenue sharing is coming. And they're saying anywhere from 22 to 23 million to start, and it'll go up based on, TV deals. But in that, they are saying that NIL isn't going away because of the fact that you just got your ass handed to you saying that you can't limit what an athlete can make off name, image, and likeness. So I'm supposed to believe that after getting your ass handed to you in court time after time again, that we're now going to get federal legislation that tells an athlete that he can't sell his name, image, and likeness. How does that work? Someone explain that to me. So yes, we're going to pay you in revenue sharing, but can the NFL or anyone else who, by the way, collectively bargains their name, image, and likeness, think about like video games and all that, but that all has to be signed through the NFLPA. You know what it doesn't prohibit? You as Patrick Mahomes going out and signing endorsement deals. So in what world is there legislation going to be passed after these court proceedings that's going to tell a college athlete that he can't make his money off name, image, and likeness? So whether it comes in-house or not, you're now telling me that boosters of programs aren't going to want to offer college athletes millions of dollars in endorsements, quote, to come be part of it?
Why would that change?
That's so dumb.
Yeah.
So a booster is going to be like, yeah, you're going to get a bunch of money coming here to play through our revenue sharing, so I don't need to pay you any. Meanwhile, Oregon, Ohio State's like, well, we'll give you money. We've got boosters with NIL pockets. That's not going away. So this Nebraska thing is him trying to bloviate in that eventually there's going to be an even playing field. No, there won't. This isn't going to change the uneven playing field. You're going to have to have the ability to pay your athletes, and schools
You got to keep up with the Joneses.
And schools that are in the SEC and the Big Ten are going to have a massive advantage because they're making $80 and $90 million.
Yep.
And so you can slice basically to come up with $22 extra million in your budget. For schools that aren't in the Big Ten and the SEC, it's brutal to have that every year. But the new money that's coming in the SEC and the Big Ten TV deals is more than this. It's more than 22 extra million. So just off your new TV deal alone, you can slice that off and your budget can stay the same and still pay your players. But you're still going to have NIL. You're still going to have to live in a world where you're going to have to pay players essentially to come there because someone else is willing to, unless through some act of God in Congress, they ban players from profiting off their name, image, and likeness. And didn't we just go through lawsuit after lawsuit
to make sure they
lawsuit?
could profit off of that? Yeah, it's not going to go back in the box.
Nebraska is sitting here bitching and moaning and making excuses for why they're not good. Sorry, it's not 1997
And he's
anymore.
basically saying, hold on and wait till 2 years until we have an even playing field.
Well, what's dumb about Nebraska is the whole reason that they were a blue blood and why they were so good is because they are the first school that embraced weightlifting. They are the first school that went out and paid an actual strength and conditioning coach. That's what made them bigger. That's what made them faster. That's what made them stronger. They did it back in the late 60s, early 70s. Everybody lifts now. The problem is they don't realize that they were only so good because they had this advantage that no one else was using.
Differentiated them, yeah.
It's very similar to like if Oregon just continued to do the blur offense from Chip Kelly and never changed, right? You had a moment in time where you were ahead of everybody. They've caught up to you now. You believe that you should still be in this spot, but you were never in that spot to begin with if you don't get lucky and have this position that you basically created.
Well, and there's a couple things I think that go into that. Obviously, that's a huge advantage because you were in the forefront of things. But they also were They were a powerhouse back in the olden days because they were committed to it. But you go back into like the 1960s and 1970s. Most college football program, it wasn't a thing. It wasn't a moneymaker. It was a pride thing. The whole reason the SEC rose up, there was a great book. We had the author on years and years ago about the rise of the SEC, and it was a way for the South.
Great documentary, Saturdays in the South as well.
Saturdays in the South. It was basically a way that the South, obviously, Civil War and all that. And since then, the South were viewed as ignorant. They were viewed as dumb. They were viewed as country bumpkins. And so, at the turn of the century in the 1900s, football was an elite sport. It was dominated by Yale and it was dominated by Harvard.
Mm-hmm.
And it was viewed as like this gentlemanly sort of thing, the service academies,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And the South
service academies in Ivy League, basically.
and the South got tired of being made fun of. And so the South kind of like the reason why football is such a big deal, it was their way of giving the bird and saying, well, we're going to be better than your elites.
Yeah, you're not better than us at everything.
Yeah. And so Nebraska was one of these programs, right, that rose up. And then in the 1980s and the 1990s, right, they had the strength and conditioning thing. They got a great coach in Tom Osborne. By the way, they were one of the first people to really embrace facilities.
Mm-hmm.
Like I remember my brother played at Nebraska in like 1994 or something. And he would talk about how you went in their strength conditioning program, they went in their weight room and it was like, oh my God.
Yeah.
And not many people back then had it. And Nebraska was just ahead of the curve on so many things. And by the way, like you didn't get on TV every week. Nebraska did because Nebraska was a big deal. They packed their stands. It was this special place. Well, again, kick forward however many years, everyone has great facilities. Everybody. Nebraska's facilities no longer are special. They're great. They're nice. But
they don't differentiate them from other programs.
No, everyone has facilities now. Everyone has great facilities. By the way, you don't need to play Nebraska to be on TV. Everyone's on TV every single week at a big time program. All these things caught up. And all of a sudden, the idea of a kid who didn't grow up watching Nebraska, and so now I'm a 4 or 5 star kid. And by the way, where are most of the recruits coming from? They're coming from the West Coast, California.
They're
Florida,
coming
from Texas, down in Florida, and down into the South, right? So and then you get some of the Rust Belt in Ohio, right? You get pockets that Virginia. Those are your recruiting hotbeds. So if I'm a kid from Texas and I'm a 5 star kid, why would I go to Nebraska when I have Texas A&M, all the SEC schools knocking at my door? Kids from California have the ability to go to USC. They can come up to Oregon, which is increasingly becoming a go-to destination. It's national recruiting. That was the other one too, is back in the day, recruiting was very isolated. It was in your region. Not anymore. California kids, like look at Bryce Young, Heisman Trophy, California kid. DJ Uyunglele, when he was the number one recruit in the country, California kid, goes to Clemson. All over. Like there just isn't a reason for these kids anymore to go to Nebraska. So for Nebraska to stand up here and say that this is a money issue and that this is like it's an uneven playing field, stop it. You got lapped 2 decades ago. You got lapped when you fired who was the red ass that they fired that won 9 games every year?
Bo
Pelini.
Pelini.
Bo Pelini.
Yep.
When Bo Pelini was there, Bo Pelini was a red ass coach that no one wanted to play for, but he won 9 games there, and you canned him, and you've been chasing your tail ever since. So for Troy Dannen to stand up here and try to go on and on. Oh, by the way, as someone points out, steroids, because Nebraska was one of the first programs that embraced that too. Go look at the players in the 90s in Nebraska. Steroids. That like, all of those things have caught up. Every one of those. So the idea that Nebraska is ever going to be a powerhouse again, and the only chance they have is because they got in the Big Ten and they're going to have a bunch of money. But when you have a bunch of money, cool. So does Ohio State, so does Oregon, so does USC, so does Texas, so does Ohio State, so does Alabama, so does LSU, so does Florida, So if I'm a big-time recruit, why would I go to Nebraska over any of those programs? Why?
Yeah. Well,
Because of the great education in Nebraska? Stop it. You're not relevant. You haven't been relevant. And the chances of you being relevant, not saying you can't, but the chances of Nebraska ever being anywhere, even a sniff of what Nebraska was in the 90s, good luck. At that point, why don't you pick a date and don't tell me, and then we'll both be surprised when it doesn't happen.
real quick, before we move on from this, regardless of what Troy Dannen thinks about what the future is going to look like, what were your thoughts on the number coming out, Oregon, Ohio State, that $23 million is about their NIL budget? Did that seem high, low, about right? What were you?
That sounds about right.
And
I think that probably is a little high.
yeah,
But we were told that when A&M freaked out when Saban called them out, we were told 25.
well, and Ryan Day himself of Ohio State 2 years ago, he told a group of Columbus business people, it'll cost us $13 million to field this roster, and now they're saying it's almost double that.
The one that I have heard time and time again for a big time school is in the mid-teens.
Okay.
And again, it's weird because it's legal, and yet everyone's still very hush about it.
There's nothing officially public about it because it's not the school.
And it's also pretty wonky because when who was the Nico kid that went to Tennessee?
Nico Laliva.
Yeah, he supposedly got whatever it was.
8.5.
8.5, but it's not 8.5 for 1 year.
No.
It's broken up quarterly payments.
It's a commitment to eventually get you 8.5.
So
it's a
to
long-term
say that
deal.
he's an $8 million kid, no, he's a $2 million kid.
Yeah.
So you're never going to pay him $8 million because he's not going to stay 4 years. And then I've also heard from a ton of people that say, oh, well, reportedly this kid got $1.5 million. In reality, when you talk to the kid, he's like, nah, I got $700,000. So the numbers we hear, one, they're wonky because it's not an upfront payment of $8 million. I do think, from my understanding, I've heard from a ton of people that those numbers tend to get inflated, and kids want them inflated because it makes them feel better about themselves. Like, oh, this is a $2 million kid. So $23 million, I don't know if I buy that. The number, again, I keep going back to it. I've heard anywhere from 13 to 15, 16 million bucks for a truly elite program. And like you said, Day said 13 million.
And that was 2 years ago he said that.
I think 13 million is a lot closer than 23. And maybe it's bumped up now, but do you need $23 million? I find that hard to believe.
And I'm not sure how we will ever prove it, but right now all we have is the word of Troy Dannen.